Hello, I'm Evan. Recently, I had the most emotional night ever, which was full of fear, tears, embarrassment, and disappointment. I even almost went to jail. And all of that happened because of my grandma. Let's start from the beginning. I'm almost 16 now, and for the past 10 years, we've been living at my grandma's place. She has plenty of illnesses she's been suffering from, and she calls her condition a simple senility. But me and my parents had to move in with her to look after her. I've always loved my granny, and tried to help out with whatever she's asked of me. But she just so happens to love my big brother more than me. And now he's already a grown-up, living in Europe. But Granny still continues to compare the two of us, and this never works out in my favour. Her words are sometimes pretty offensive, especially taking into account that Grandma has never been what I would call soft-spoken. Anyway, since she lives with us, I've had no chance to avoid her. By the time this whole story happened, Grandma was about to celebrate her 80th birthday. The doctor said it would probably be her last celebration, so we decided to arrange a huge party for her. I really wanted to cheer her up and make her less nervous, so I asked Granny what she would like for me to get her as a birthday present. This cunning lady has always been pretty devious. She said that the best present for her would be if I were to be as good as my brother. But since I happened to be the black sheep, the only thing I could do to make her happy was to give her a beautiful ruby necklace, just like the one she knew our neighbour Mrs. Delphi had. I knew that something like that was really expensive, and I couldn't afford it. But when I told Granny this, trying to persuade her to pick another birthday present, she said something to me that I'll never be able to forget. If you can't buy it, go and steal it. Of course, I thought she was kidding, and I tried to add to her joke by asking if she knew where I could get a gun to rob the jewellery store. She said she always knew that I wasn't that smart, but she didn't know I was that stupid. Go and get Mrs. Delphi's necklace. Not one from a jewellery store, she said. And then she added that if I would just show some courage and prove my love to her in this way, she would give me a car, like she did for my older brother, and she would finally be able to be proud of both of her grandsons. This left my head spinning. Did she really mean it? Did my almost 80-year-old grandmother really want me to steal a necklace for her? And literally, since that talk, I constantly found myself thinking over her request. I mean, it definitely was illegal to steal something, but I desperately wanted a car. Plus, Grandma wouldn't live long, so I might not actually be stealing, but more like borrowing the necklace, and nobody would actually ever know what I'd done. And Mrs. Delphi had always treated me so well. So at first, I decided to go visit her, and find out whether she still had the necklace, and where she kept it. I decided to convince her to let me help mow her lawn. Mrs. Delphi was happy that I'd helped her, and after I did my work, she invited me in for a cup of tea. During the talk, I learned that the necklace was a wedding gift from her husband, who had passed away a long time ago, and she still had it in her console, in a box next to their photo. Even though I wasn't up for the robbery, later that night, I came up with the perfect plan. Just in case. A few days later, the day of the big party came. Practically the whole street had gathered at our house to celebrate my grandma's last birthday. Mrs. Delphi also came, even though she used to be pretty cold towards Granny for reasons I'd never known about. At this point, I couldn't bear to give Granny her requested present. But when she once again said what a shame it was to have such a coward like me in the family, I made up my mind. The only thing I was thinking about while trying to break into Mrs. Delphi's house was to just steal the necklace and stop Grandma from bullying me. It wasn't hard either, getting into the house or finding the necklace. It was really beautiful, by the way. But on the way back out, I suddenly heard the door open and shut. Mrs. Delphi had already come back home. I had no place and no time to hide. I was in a panic and scared to death, already imagining myself in custody of police officers, with handcuffs on, being taken to prison. Thoughts were flashing through my mind. And then she saw me. It took her a few seconds to recognize me, and I saw fear in her eyes. It's embarrassing to admit, but I even started to cry while I was trying to explain everything to Mrs. Delphi and convince her not to call the police. Fortunately, she didn't do it. She grabbed my ear, literally almost ripping it off, and took me to Grandma. She told her what happened, but then Grandma surprised me once again. "I know nothing about any necklace," she said, and exploded with laughter. This reaction put me in total shock. However, Mrs. Delphi didn't seem shocked at all. She took me back to her place, and there, over a cup of tea, she gave me a proper explanation. It turned out that years ago, she and Grandma had a fight over a guy named Patrick. Grandma used to go out with him, but he'd fallen in love with Mrs. Delphi, and left my grandma for her. Later, Granny met Grandpa, and they got married, but her hatred towards Mrs. Delphi had never faded. So, this situation with me and the necklace might have become some sort of revenge for an almost ancient offence. I knew something like that was going to happen. That's why ever since I told you about the necklace, I've been keeping my eye on you, Mrs. Delphi said. She also said that she wasn't angry at me for trying to rob her, since I'd already been punished by having such a wicked grandmother. Actually, I'm still frustrated over that situation, and I never discussed it with my grandma. She, by the way, is also behaving as if nothing special happened that night, and I didn't get the car that I was promised either. Do any of you guys have a clue what I should do now? I always loved my granny, but how can I even continue to talk to her? Please share your opinion in the comments for this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, unless you already have.